It gives me great pleasure to bring the directors of the film, Petra Epperlein and Michael Tucker, up to take some questions. Thank you both so much for being here. You can take your masks off up here. You're safe up here. Just click the switch up and you'll be on. We're also broadcasting this live to a Zoom audience. Well, not live, but a recorded version to the Zoom audience. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for this really moving, beautiful, and important film. And I'll start off with a few questions, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. But I wanted to start by asking why you wanted to make this film now.
Okay, first of all, thank you for coming out at this very hot evening and watching the film and having us here. What was the question? Why we make the film right now? Well, we started making the film more than 4 years ago. The world looked still slightly different. And it's kind of scary to watch how so many things we addressed in the film over the years basically they were theoretically abstract and they became some sort of reality now.
Yeah, I think the initial impulse, in fact, there are two things. One, when we were finishing our last film, Karl Marx City, we were filming in the former East Germany, and we came across these enormous anti-immigration marches, which featured sort of like somewhat middle-class Germans mixed in with very hardcore neo-Nazis. And one night we were filming, and there were about 30,000 people, and at a certain point, and you see it in the film, they turned to us, and they're chanting lying press, or Lügenpresse in German, which is straight from like Nazi times. And it was sort of like, how is that possible in Germany where so much of this has been at least a mass? I mean, we're talking not like 1,000 people, 30,000. How is that happening now? And of course, now we've seen the very far-right AfD party in some states has 25% of the vote. The second thing was Charlottesville, and today is the 4th anniversary of Charlottesville, and that was that time as an American watching how is it possible that young, educated Americans are chanting, Jews will not replace us. And the world's just watching.
And you take on a topic that's very, of course, comes with a lot of baggage and is a topic that's been discussed in many ways. How did you decide where to start and how you were going to explore this topic? You also go very broad with it and speak to so many amazing people and so many less amazing people. We'll get to that.
I mean, the simple answer is we started with the book. The book is this very slim, concise dissection of the Hitler cult. It's about 170 or 180 pages. It was written in the 70s when comparable volumes were literally like 800 or 1,000 pages long, and were very, I wouldn't say fawning, but Hitler suddenly became this sort of pop culture figure, and this whole industry was formed around him, and here was this book that just dismantled him. So that was the starting point, but the problem is once you go down this rabbit's hole, it's sort of endless.
Yeah, so we actually shot so many more themes, stories, and talked to so many more people than ended up in the film. It is really like a large subject. It was very difficult to narrow it down.
I have to say, as somebody who curates cinema for the Jewish Community Center, obviously we watch a lot of Holocaust cinema, and I think it's so important today to remember, not just to remember, I was saying this also before the film, not just to remember for historical purposes, but for its relevance today. And it's important actually, and that's kind of one of the last lines of the film, it's important to make sure that we humanize everything, to remember that Hitler was a human being, and he wasn't something that pop culture has made him into something beyond human. And that makes him almost unrelatable and something that possibly couldn't exist in today's world. But it's important to actually, and I think this film reminds us, to understand who Hitler was as a person, and to know that other people can be Hitler too, that he wasn't one of a kind. Yeah.
That's a question.
No. I mean, first of all, do you have feelings about that? And then I'll take it in a few other directions.
Yeah, of course. I think it's very important to see that Hitler is not directly separate from us, because if we put him in a corner on a pedestal or something, we don't take on our own responsibility. I mean, that's me as a German speaking, of course. But when we project history, or when we see history through today's eyes and see what the parallels are from the past, then it's important to not just see, oh, there is this man who does all these crazy things and we have nothing to do with it, but we have to see only that we actually enable a person to do all these crazy things. So we should work hard to not make that happen.
I agree.
And of course, with the leaderships and around the world today, where the directions that politics are taking, this becomes more relevant. And this is something. Do you feel that there have been other voices along the way that have been as powerful as Hitler, or as dangerous as Hitler? Let me put it that way.
You mean today?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. We don't really like to compare today's leader directly to Hitler. That's not really the point. But of course, there are parallels in development and history, or like certain politicians seem to borrow directly from Hitler's playbook. So I think it's important to understand what happened back then and how it could happen to actually see what happens here today.
I mean, I was shocked yesterday to read that Trump was praising Ashley Babbitt, the woman that was killed in the Capitol, and sort of framing her as this martyr, and then also singling out the police officer who shot her and saying, we know his name, sort of as this threat. And it may seem extreme to say it, but I actually don't. It's a little bit like Horst Wessel, like this martyrdom, of someone dying in the early Nazi movement. And I mean, where does this take us? I mean, we are so far away from 2016 now. I mean, it almost seems like anything is possible.
Yeah. In America today, there's a lot of talk about anti-Semitism and a rise of anti-Semitism. There's different kinds of anti-Semitism. Do you find this film relevant to that? Do you find that the explorations of anti-Semitism that you see in the film have to do with American anti-Semitism today, or would you say that that's a very different topic?
I don't even know if there are different. I don't know, how is American anti-Semitism different than German anti-Semitism today? I wouldn't have an answer to that. I never really thought that there are different kinds. There are these irrational hatreds, and they are spanning the globe, and it's actually unbelievable that it resurfaces so strongly now, like 80 years after Hitler. And that was kind of also the motivation to make the film, to talk about that and to actually really see it, how it's happening in front of us. And it's not a problem of the past. It's actually really happening. And yeah, I don't know if that was an answer, actually.
I mean, I would say that there's three key forms of anti-Semitism in America today. There's the neo-Nazi form of anti-Semitism, mostly from right-wing white people. Then there's the social anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that has to do with socioeconomic relevance of the Jewish community and how that plays out. And then, of course, there's Israel-related anti-Semitism, which is possibly a whole separate area. I think the first two connect more than the third to each other.
Yeah, I think one thing that I saw, in fact, I was just watching the film, I was reminded that new anti-Semitism that we're seeing that's almost fueled with this sort of like South Park irony, that seems so dangerous when you suddenly have a whole generation of kids that are so far from the history and they're encountering this hate online and these memes. And it's funny, and when we were first exposed to it, we were thinking, oh, that's just sort of like a fringe thing, but it's not. It's in everything. And I think when you see the gamer girl, Brittany Ventney, on screen, the comments they're so incredibly obscene, but this is completely mainstream. It's not like it's hiding in a chat room. It's hiding, corporations are hosting these things, and it's not moderated. And certainly with these kids, they're provided no context. There's nothing popping up saying, hey, like, this is what that is. And I think by the time they get to know what it is, it's too late. They're already, as you see with her, she became radicalized. She suddenly became victimized by going to Charlottesville, by being called out for going to Charlottesville, and that just pushed her further into that camp.
And what is the solution?
Well, I mean, it's also funny, you see it in the film. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg saying things like, some people just get it wrong. I mean, it took him forever to come around to moderate hate speech. And I don't know if that's a legal question or if it's more of a social question, but something has to be done. There has to be some civil standard.
I think also, like, it's kind of a funny question. What is the solution? If there would be a solution, then there wouldn't be. If there would just be a solution, then we wouldn't have to deal with the problem of anti-Semitism anymore, because, yeah, it's not a new problem, right? So I think to keep the conversation going, to address it, and to stand up against it actively, I think that's not a solution, but that's what we have to do, I think.
Thank you. Just a little ad for Apple up there for a moment. One last question, then I'm going to take some questions from the audience. Beyond having Deborah Lipstadt, you also have David Irving in the same film, which is quite amazing. And I just have to ask about your interactions with him. That's in some ways the more curious side. And I wonder just like why he agreed, and did he know? Has he seen the film? Does he know what part of the film he would be playing?
Yeah, so to include or not to include David Irving was a long discussion what we had. Should we do it or not? And ultimately we decided you can make a film called The Meaning of Hitler without having like one of the most famous Holocaust deniers in the film. And also Sebastian Haffner was one of the first, he talks about him in the book, The Meaning of Hitler, and he was one of the first people who actually took issue with his view of history, with his distorted view of history. And then we just reached out to him and told him pretty much what we did. I mean, we didn't lie to him or anything, and he immediately agreed to meet us, and he suggested that we meet him in Poland, in Treblinka, because he was doing one of his so-called real history tours for some clients, and we were almost dumbfounded, and we said, how can he be traveling around in Poland with people talking about his twisted view of the world? How is this even possible? You know, he's not allowed into Germany, he can't go to Austria, he can't go to a range of other countries, but he can go to Poland and propagate his view of the world. So yeah, so we went and saw him, and that was a pretty difficult experience.
Questions from the audience? I'll pass the microphone around.
Well, beginning, does this work? Can you hear? Does it work? Okay. Beginning with another Austrian, we know for a long time that the very beginning of one's life determines one's brain, as the neurons are formed in the very earliest years of our life, and that's true of Trump, for instance, that he had a tyrannical father and a negligent mother, a neglecting mother, and I can't help but wonder, and you gave some, I don't know, I'm not going to say lip service, you did touch on this, but there were no, hasn't anybody done any kind of work on that? I mean, you know, what his parents were like, and he has to have been screwed up very early. Otherwise, he couldn't possibly have done those things.
Well, it's interesting, Klaus Teweleit, who's in the film, he's sort of like the Zizek of fascism, the historian with the long hair. He pointed out to us, in fact, he's of the World War II generation. He pointed out that, you know, probably every single German male was beaten by their father. And this is a nation that was completely...
Of that generation, of the same generation. But
I mean, I think that there's and, you know, Teweleit has written, you know, extensively about violence and misogyny and all of these threads. But I think people like Deborah Lipstadt are also very right to point out, in fact, we live in Berlin now, and we are walking down by Tiergarten, by the main park, down Tiergartenstrasse, and we saw a monument that I had never seen before, and I was like, huh, what's that? And I realized it's the monument for T4, and T4 stands for Tiergartenstrasse number 4, and that's where the eugenics program started, and that was run by doctors, perfectly educated, cosmopolitan people who then took all of that skill and applied it to the extermination camps. And Lipstadt is so clear about, these were normal people. And I think it's dangerous to always look for fault. And Trump is enabled by all sorts of perfect, seemingly normal people.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I just wanted to ask a cinematic thing that I thought was interesting, but I had never seen it before, and that is the slating of every scene. What made you, how did you come to that decision? And also, what was the purpose in your, I think I get the purpose, but I would like to hear from you what you were thinking. Thank you.
So we used the slate. I mean, a slate is this very old tool, right, to mark where you are in the film. And so we used it a little bit as a visual reference for us to be able to structure the film and also to have actually that reference where we are, since we knew from the beginning it would be a very complicated film with many locations. And so we wanted to give it some structure for ourselves and then also to help the audience along to see where we are and what we are doing.
Hi, thank you so much for that enlightening representation, which we've heard so much. I wanted to ask you something about the beginning. What was in Berlin? I missed it in the beginning. What were they talking about in the beginning about Berlin? And also, I just wanted to say to the person who just spoke before about Hitler, that Hitler is just one man. I mean, there are other people in the times, and there were other. Fascism was a movement that was all over. So Hitler was the worst, but it could have been Mussolini. Who knows? It could have been Franco. So.
Well, thanks for that. Can you talk about the beginning?
The beginning. I'm not sure exactly which.
So we sit on the train in the very first scene. Do we sit on the?
You could review it online through IFC.
We don't remember.
And,
We sit on the
I'm
train.
sorry, I don't remember either. Last question over here, we'll take.
So first, fascinating film, so thank you. I wonder, after you made this film, thinking about it, where you put the weight more on the leader, or the person, or the crowd? What do you think play a more significant role in not necessarily just getting to an Holocaust, but actually getting into, things that Trump promote? That makes sense?
I mean, I think that the crowd is far more frightening. I think the person, Hitler was enabled by all sorts of things, but that crowd, that willingness to act, to be pushed to that, like with these words, and then to act on it and again, when we started making the film, all these things were theoretical, and we had actually premiered the film in New York last November, moved to Berlin, and then there we are watching television on January 6th, watching this all unfold, thinking, what has gotten into these people? We're talking about one man. I mean, so the man, the cult, it's not so much the man, but the cult. And I think none of us will ever understand what is that chemistry, what happens there.
Yeah, I think it's Hitler was able to, he had this talent to get the perceived victimhood in a large portion of German society then to form it into a mass movement. And you can just say Trump has has a similar talent. And when people come together, Trump basically gives them permission to think what they really want to think and to say these things. And then the next step is, of course, he gives them permission to act on all these things. And there are strong parallels, of course. I mean, Trump's no Hitler, I need to say this again. But, these things happened before, and it's important that we know how they can end, ultimately, to act.
Michael and Petra, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this wonderful film. Folks, please do tell your friends. Help spread the word about this film. And we look forward to seeing you at other upcoming screenings. Have a good night, everyone.
I just want to say how great it is to screen the film for a real-life audience, because that's the first time you're doing that. So, yes.
Nobody's alive here. This is an audience of zombies right here. But being able to do this outside also is live and safe, so it's beautiful. Thank you for doing it.